All right, we're going to get started in just a moment. There's some folks coming in. If you want to scooch over a bit, I'll create some space for them to come in because there's some folks from the courtyard. We're good on that. If you want to stop the music, we'll go ahead and get started. No, perfect. Thank you. As we get started, we just have a brief announcement for our Spanish language attendees.
Hola, buenas tardes. Queremos recordarles que tenemos servicio de interpretación en español. Si alguien necesita que le interpretemos en el oído, ¿verdad? Tenemos los aparatitos allá en la entrada para que se gustan venir a pasar por un aparatito para su oído, ¿ok? Muchas gracias. Thank you.
Gracias. All right, with that, welcome everyone. I know it's been a long day and we're really excited to get started with our keynote speaker. So it is now my honor to introduce Kahshanna Evans. Kahshanna brings her passion for uniting people through stories and trauma-informed awareness to her role as the Director of Creating Resilient Communities, how fitting, at Pace's Connection. Kahshanna has been a leading strategic thinker in various industries, including communications, technology, professional services, and wellness. And as a lifetime student of human nature, interconnectivity, and play, she has studied the performing arts in New York City. She traveled extensively during her early career and immersed herself in various modalities of well-being. Kahshanna maintains an evergreen affinity for human rights, the freedom of expression, and the regenerative power of transformation as a vehicle for a better world. And I will add that she had a very long trip to get here from New York. She traveled by train. So she is dedicated to being here today. We saw her speak this morning. She led an incredible session. So please join me in giving a Yolo County welcome to our keynote speaker, Kahshanna Evans.
Okay. Yes, YOLO. Clap for yourselves too. Clap for your industry. Clap for your sector, your coworkers. I got a chance to meet some folks that were lovingly harassing one another. Like, I kind of work with her, and yes, it's a love affair. So I'm super glad to be here today. This is a life moment, so I'm going to slow down right now and just really connect with everyone. I know some folks are streaming in who couldn't make it, so welcome if you're live with us today, and if you see this later while you're having popcorn on a Sunday because finally the house is clear of folks, please enjoy this presentation. I am super glad to be here. Next slide, please. Oh, this is so much excitement. Okay, so I do have some notes today, so just want to give you that brief that the topics that we touch on are important. So I will be present with you, but I'll also be keeping those notes close to make sure that I'm a clear communicator and I hit the important points today. So today's presentation is PACES a movement? Today's presentation will explore the meaning of a movement and a few key attributes of a movement that can apply to the work being done to accelerate the PACES movement. We will explore the meanings of the following terms in the context of social movement, and participants will potentially, if you're feeling like sharing with us, share your experiences of the movement and the social justice work that you're doing. So we get this opportunity today to touch on this work, but also to be in community with each other. So I'm in community with you, but you're also in community with each other. And for those who are live and they are commenting and dropping comments in the chat, you're also community. So the pronouns today are we, us. So we'll be touching on what is social justice, hopefully hearing your stories, but more importantly, encouraging you to understand, and me reminding myself each time I do that, that our stories matter. It's a big part of being change agents. Brief history of movements, and from moment to movement, the PACES science story, and why PACES is a social justice issue. Or is it? So, okay, and I just want to take a moment to bring an important name into the room, Jane Stevens, who started ACES Connection so many years ago and has poured so much energy in. I see some heads nodding here, so lots of powerful years-long relationships in the making. So I had a chance to connect with Jane via Zoom, not yet in person. So in Jane's own words, the basic knowledge about ACEs is fueling an ACEs movement. And now, of course, we'll be talking about a PACEs movement, which now has hundreds of pediatricians integrating ACEs science, hundreds of schools, dozens of juvenile detention centers, more than a dozen states whose legislatures have passed everything from resolutions acknowledging the importance of ACEs science and trauma-informed practices to legislation integrating trauma-informed practices in schools, hundreds of cities, counties, and regions who are launching local ACEs initiatives. And one state Jane mentions, Wisconsin, whose governor directed the 7 largest state agencies to engage in a 2-year trauma-informed learning collaborative. And by show of hands here, is everyone involved in trauma-informed care, healthcare, mental health? Raise your hands, right? So for those of you who may not be able to see the audience, it's probably, if I were to estimate, about 70% plus. Next slide, please. I love this slide. So PACES Connection supports the ever-expanding PACES movement by educating people about PACES science. We engage them in the movement by increasing the number of people who join PACES Connection. We help communities launch and grow PACES initiatives, online and in person, and provide tools to help them measure their progress. We act as the information resource for the PACES movement by telling its stories and by providing resources. So I've been at PACES for about, I want to say 6 or 7 months by now, and it's been a real adventure. It's been eye-opening. I am meeting folks that have been doing this work for years prior to my time at PACES Connection. And so we are having powerful conversations about how the world of academia and science definitely interconnect with folks who have lived experience. And we've learned about trauma-informed awareness through our own journeys. So we are sharing notes. Next slide, please. So PACES Connection, we have about almost 60,000 members and growing, who are all sharing best practices based on PACES science. Next slide, please. And we are supporting 430 cities, countries, and states, all who have their own PACES initiatives, who are utilizing our free community sites, our tools and guidelines on how to further their movement and the movement. Next slide, please. So we're going to touch on a rapid review of PACES science. And as I kind of alluded to a moment ago, the real beauty about today is that it really is this moment we have to have shared language. So even if someone has been in these powerful industries for 20, 30, 40 years, or folks are just entering 10, 15, 5 years, it's really important that we're on the same page. And when we can succeed in doing that and understanding it's not about our comfort, but when we can do that, we can support younger generations in doing it and not having stigma because they're not using the perfect jargon. So for those of you who are super familiar with the terms, yes, I will be, today is an entry-level discussion on is PACES a movement, and it is a beautiful, wonderful rabbit hole that's deserving of a million zillion like deep diving courses. For today, we have a little less than an hour. Next slide, please. So we really utilize this graphic, and I really like that this is a sort of a, anyone with five fingers can kind of utilize this framework to remember what PACES is really about. So PACES, which is standing for Positive and Adverse Childhood Experiences, Very important to know the branches that we touch on. Also, as a quick pause, as we all may know here, but it's worthy of kind of bringing this into the room, this is an evolving conversation. So it's less about wishing there was one wiki page that just everything is locked into and it's perfectly living there. And so today is a little bit more about this is a growing and evolving conversation and discussion we can have together. But it is about evidence-based information on the epidemiology. So the impact on the brain and the body, especially during developmental years. Those are three. The epigenetics, the generation-to-generation impact and historical trauma. And resilience, which oftentimes is people's favorite branch. But these all are very important, and no need to sort of memorize these, but it's a really, it's a great graphic for entry-level discussions on the work. Next slide, please. And so ultimately, the ACE study touched on abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction. But I think it's also important to really look at, sorry, I lost a little space. So the PACES science, just to touch on what PACES science represents. So the implications of the CDC Kaiser ACEs study and the research on positive childhood experiences. So this slide is one of the two that I just referenced. So when I speak about PACES science is looking at both of those, and of course that is a part of the ongoing discussions that I mentioned. Like, it really is evolving each day, each week. There's something different to reflect on, or there's a new community utilizing it in ways to empower one another and focus on repair and restoration for their communities. Bless you. So, toxic stress from these childhood experiences damages our brain. So the important thing about adverse childhood experiences and understanding why that even needed to be defined is that it was having an impact, it has an impact on toxic stress. Toxic stress affects our bodies, toxic stress affects our brains, and we can pass the toxic stress down from generation to generation in our genes and from mother to fetus. So the effects of toxic stress caused by the things that you see here, but also we'll visit other slides and see other ways that this impacts us. The effects of toxic stress include neurobiology, which are effects of toxic stress from ACEs on a child's developing brain, health consequences, long-term effects of toxic stress from ACEs on the body. And I want to give a gentle reminder that no matter how positive a person we are identified being positive and optimistic. Keep that enthusiasm. We know the world needs it. But when it comes to health consequences, that's not about positive thinking. And the more realistic we can be with that, the more we can support one another and create supportive environments that this movement is really rooted in. So health consequences, the long-term effects of toxic stress of ACEs on our bodies, the epigenetic consequences, the effects of toxic stress from ACEs that are passed down from generation to generation. And what we can do about it, and if you all remember the pinky on the previous graphic, resilience, that our brains can heal through trauma-informed practice and mindfulness. Next slide, please. So these are the 10 original ACE study questions. The questions touched on child abuse, various forms, physical neglect, mental illness. So just give you a moment to connect with how powerful it is just to see some of the largest moments many of the folks we care for and maybe even ourselves have experienced can be narrowed down to this one slide. And also as a reminder, because I love our optimists and we really need them. You don't have to have had a obviously negative, you may not pick it up that it impacted you deeply. So the ACE study is not to judge or limit. It's just sparked an incredible shift in how we look at the trauma-informed, the need for trauma-informed awareness and resilience-building frameworks. I thought this one was really interesting because the loss of a parent to death or abandonment. So this could be a wonderful, optimistic person, a pretty perfect childhood, seemingly, and not realizing like, oh, when those two folks I love decided that it was time to make larger changes, I was more impacted than I recognize. So sometimes we're in a society that tells us, oh, just turn the other cheek or look on the bright side. It's not that we're not looking on the bright side. It's that something important happened, and that changed a little bit of us. Next slide, please. This is a very, very precious slide to me. This helped me with some aha moments. So there's a direct link between childhood trauma and adult onset of chronic disease, as well as mental illness, social and economic problems. And about 2/3 of the adults in this study experienced one or more adverse childhood experiences. I think you may have a handout. You may have a handout in your swag bags. So there's some great graphics there. The graphics there indicate there's about, bless you, there's about 36% of folks with no ACEs. And it doesn't mean they cannot be a part of the ACEs movement. There's 1% with there's 26% with just one ACE. We want to play poker with them, and they also are welcome to be a part of the movement. And 4 or more ACEs, there's about 12.5% of people that have 4 or more ACEs. And so that's when our health starts to see some changes, some longer term impacts. So the more adverse childhood experiences result in a higher risk of medical, mental, social, and economic problems as an adult. I do want to add here that it was when I understood you don't have to judge the things you're observing that this information just started to be really galvanizing. It started to really help me understand how I can connect to others who may or may not have had their own ACEs, and how we can pivot to the resilience part of the discussion and conversation. And we'll touch on that today, because today is about you change agents who are part of the PACES movement. Next slide, please. So we're going to touch a little bit on what the ACEs study missed. And as a reminder, you might, if you're in science, STEM, academia, you're in the field and you have some breaking news on it, please keep sharing that. Keep sharing it with each other, keep networking with each other, because we can collect an amazing slide presentation, but we are really crowdsourcing this wisdom and this movement together, and that happens on a day-to-day basis, relationship to relationship, and community to community. Next slide, please. So as we mentioned, the original ACEs study really measured the 10 types of adversity in childhood and health and behavioral issues as adults. So that was the epidemiology piece. The ACE study focused on the traumatic experiences that occur within and because of the household. childhood abuse and neglect, family dysfunction such as untreated mental health issues, substance abuse, incarcerated family member, domestic violence of a mother or parent, and divorce. So this slide is powerful because as we think about the impact of ACEs, and many of you are working with children and minors, children living in poverty, homelessness, and with other social vulnerabilities are significantly more apt to experience the stress and the trauma. So subsequent ACE surveys include other types of childhood adversities, such as racism, sexism, bullying, witnessing violence outside of the home, and living in unsafe neighborhoods. So we're going to come back to sections of these slides. While the ACE study focused on households, I'll just give you a moment to look at that tree and see if the services your organization is providing, something is sparked up there. Is this your superpower to help communities that are working their way through these things? Community, so we start to look at relationships and not just one-directional relationships, that mutual community where you know you need something and I have something, so it's happening today. And environment. So we'll touch on that in a moment. Next slide, please. So I'll give you all a moment to take a look at your county or the counties and areas that you serve and how you're doing with, there's over 30% unhoused per 10,000 residents. There's a stat on here about 7th graders here, which is about 25% for Yolo. So we just wanted to, include this, and specialty communities such as LGBTQIA, 2S, which is for the two-spirited folks, immigrants, Black, African American, elderly, folks that have different levels of mobility. So we know we are not defined by challenges and environmental changes, but it's important to recognize the problems that do exist and what we can do about them as a community. So that's really why we're here today. This is a quick stop. This is not your bottom line. And I've been here for maybe 4 days now. And it's not the Yolo I know already. So and just a quick note. So this geographical data comparison sheet highlights differences in health, including health behaviors and services across Yolo County. And thank you to the Yolo team for providing this report. The purpose of these sheets is to support the Community Health Improvement Plan, that's CHIP, work group, and the Yolo County residents and community partners at large in understanding and addressing poor health outcomes and health disparities. So, information is key. Next slide, please. So we touched on this earlier. I think what I love about this particular graphic, and we'll sort of look at section 1, 2, and 3. There's this then and now that I sort of take away when I see this graphic. What were we encouraged to think back then when we were just kind of maybe getting started, maybe in grade school, maybe our parents and our caretakers told us certain things to help us focus on maybe what's more optimistic or things that our little kids should be focusing on. So I always have like an inner child that's like, I know so much more about this through the trauma-informed awareness work we're doing. And the narratives are really important. It's one thing if we are helping others and we may not have experienced it, but it's also so powerful to watch people find their voices. And we touched on that in one of the earlier sessions. So they can speak about their own lived experiences and bring our work full circle so that there's this story that's revealing itself that helps us to connect with each other. Next slide, please. So the community piece. I'll invite you to look at the roots of this tree and which of these reflect the work that you do, whether paid or unpaid. So if anyone's feeling like sharing, which of these reflect the work you do? So if you are in Health and Human Services, you want to give a shout out to your organization and let us know what you're doing that connects to the tree roots. You are welcome. Amazing. I have plenty of business cards, so please, everyone, make sure you get one before leaving. Anyone else? What organizations are in the house? Okay. I'm just determined to make you jog. Yes. I'm sorry. Is that a second mic on? Okay, there it is.
Test, test. My name is Kamika Edwards. I represent Davis Joint Unified School District with my colleague Annette, and my role is foster homeless youth liaison, and so I'm part of the community that supports those, managing poverty and surviving and trying to thrive with limited resources.
Okay. I have a quick question while we see if does anyone else want to share your nonprofit? Do I see any more hands? Okay. I have a quick question. So there were 3 sections. Community was one, household was another, and environment was the other. So how many people here are working with an organization that deals with all 3 of the parts of that graphic? Just by show of hands. Oh, okay. So for those of you who are not here and who are streaming in, that was, I want to say, maybe about a good 27, 28% of people raised their hands. That's my guesstimator. And how many for community only? Just mainly your nonprofit is focused on the community component. Seen here in the tree roots, we see historical trauma, substandard schools, violence, poverty, lack of jobs. Okay, so it seems like so far there's lots of overlap. We can go to the next slide. So the environment is the most recent part of that ACEs study, that ACEs puzzle. That we've begun looking at how are people impacted during their early, what are those adversities? So the climate crisis is parading on every social channel we have access to. And across headlines, we are able to see that we need to pay attention to Pachamama, Mother Earth, and return respect so we can get some balance and live at our full potential instead of living in defense of the dysfunction that we're fighting to move beyond. So is anyone here, your organization is working in climate crisis? Okay, I see a hand here. Amazing, so we've got one specific nonprofit here. What's the name of your nonprofit? Cool Davis. Powerful. So you likely raised your hand when there was all three as well. I got you. Did I see a hand? Okay. So I'll touch on a little quick moment here. I am most often facilitating the Creating Resilient Communities program from my home in Manhattan, New York City. And I was sort of logging on one day while getting the news that, hey, we're going to get some winds and some wildfires. And I was like, okay, whatever. And there was like an orange out. I'm on the 8th floor and I could not see past the tip of my finger here because it was so smoky, and it was, due to the time of day, it was orange. So it was very, very bizarre. I was a little tongue twisted that day. So anyone else in smokes and fires? Okay, I see some hands here. Okay. Hurricanes. Florida, where are you? Okay. Tornadoes. Ooh, you tornado folk. I see a hand raised over there. You're brave. That one would definitely make me feel like the size of a mouse. Okay, you can go to the next slide. So we're going to get into the good stuff. The next slide. So is PACES a social justice movement? So the purpose of today's presentation is to think about how PACES fits into change efforts. There are no right or wrong ways to think about how this can impact your organization or your own personal work. Some of the information today is a grounding for thinking through your next steps. And for those of you who will be here for our final session, we're going to do a little road mapping in that session. So keep your ideas and jot notes down in that awesome little journal that we've been given. So some of the information today is a grounding for thinking through the next steps, addressing social justice issues from a PACES lens, and organizing resilient communities. Next slide, please. So from moment to movement, so just to touch on the PACES history. And for those of you streaming in or who need a refresher on PACES, PACES is an acronym for Positive and Adverse Childhood Experiences. And powerfully, when we know about how both operate, we have that power and that support we need to understand what's happening to others and be able to have a shared language about what that is and what it looks like and ways to move forward. So from moment to movement, PACES history, there was a paradigm shift in the study of trauma. PACES starts with the ACEs study. That's rooted in trauma theory. So the U.S. study of trauma personalizes trauma. The global study of trauma examines traumatogenic structures. So ACEs field building work begins to include critiques of original ACEs focus, especially what is left out. PACES follows other sectors and integrates equity and anti-racism focus. And positive childhood experiences research, which is PCE, becomes integrated into ACEs work, creating a new PACES focus. Next slide, please. So oftentimes with different groups, different organizations, we may maintain an understanding of how we define social movement within that specific organization based on our mission and our social work. So please feel free to take notes on your own definition of social movement if it differs from this. And again, no right or wrong answer. It's just a grounding for the discussion we're having today. So David Cardenas of North Bay Organizing Project says that collective efforts on the parts of people and organizations with common purposes to promote or resist changes in the culture or structure of society that often use non-institutional methods in sustained interaction, sometimes over years and decades, with elites, opponents, and authorities. Next slide, please. What is a movement? A movement campaigns on defined issues. It utilizes power-building organizing strategies. A movement is public, utilizing messaging for actions such as marches, rallies, or other things that we can do to anchor in the message and amplify and share and spread those messages. And issue education, meaning there's trainings, there's open meetings, there is information provided so that we can learn and be on the same page with that shared language so we can move forward as a united front. Next slide, please. So you may be familiar with some of the social movements on this slide. So I'll just give you a moment to look at, is there anything that tugs you? Anything that gives you that reminder of a grandparent sharing something with you, or maybe even a young person in your life saying, hey, guess what's happening out there? Guess what I saw on TikTok? So we see the movement to center Black feminist theory, things like Black Lives Matter. Those are on my radar. You may have things on your radar. Movement to organize farm workers and expand labor rights. And I know that here in Yolo, there is so much wonderful agricultural land. It's been just beautiful being here. The movement to end sexual violence through Tarana Burke's Me Too movement. And I've left a question mark on the PACES movement. Next slide, please. So the historical movement goals in the United States are to end income, wealth disparity, and poverty, ending racism and denial of human and civil rights, achieving immigrant rights and labor rights, achieve education access, and ultimately securing a social infrastructure for health care, child care, elder care, and universal basic income. I think some people call that dignity, but I'm really glad that we're able to unpack it on this slide. Next slide, please. So if we're not talking about power, is it a movement? Raise of hands. If we're not talking about power, do you think it's still a movement? PACES is still a movement. Okay, I see some hands. No right or wrong. It's not a trick question, I promise. Okay. So next slide, please. This is big energy. I am loving the energy of this quote. Dolphins need advocacy. Poor, marginalized people need power. Next slide, please. So just to define social and political power, what we mean by that is having the power to make decisions, having the power to center or prevent discussions, and having the power to support or discourage the imagination of alternatives. Next slide, please. Power shifting, more aha moments for me. I'm sleeping with this one under my pillow. Where is the power prior to the movement? What does the movement demand, right? Where to shift power towards? Who called for the change? Who is at the center of organizing? So what policies, practices, programs, processes, procedures, and protocols must be interrupted and or disrupted as a result of the organizing? Next slide, please. Is PACES a social justice movement? Raise of hands. Anyone, do we think it's a social justice movement? Okay, so for those of you streaming in, I'm seeing probably about half hands. Next slide, please. So PACES is a movement the moment that the people that are the most impacted, those who are closest to the pain, are leading the work and defining and refining the terms through language and strategy. Those with ascribed power, who are in a position to lead the work, actively make space for and support those most impacted. And leadership by the most impacted ideally gets to a place where it's natural. So when focused on finding solutions to being impacted. Next slide, please. So here we are. This is the graphic for the Creating Resilient Communities Accelerator Program that I spearhead at PACES Connection. This is free to the general public thanks to grants, Genentech grants, sponsorships, and partnerships. Next slide, please. So I want to take a quick look at our program as a vehicle for the PACES movement. We have a curriculum that informs on trauma-informed awareness and resilience-building frameworks. We are educating on entry-level language and commonly used terms, and we're really doing that to make sure to eliminate gatekeeping. PACES science is for everyone. So we want to make sure that that message is thorough, it is consistent. You are welcome if you are impacted, if you just want to show up and help. If you want to be a part of it, we're not going to keep you away over there because we have the access to academia and you do not. So I really love that that is centered. We're supporting and developing advocacy. This program is a 16-hour accelerator program, and it is a certification program. So I also like that because, right, today's tag is connect, reflect, and act. So connecting, I feel like a lot of folks can do that. Reflecting, a lot of folks can do that. But when it comes to action, sometimes that linear goal, such as a certification, can be the perfect thing to just center folks and say, all right, I'm going to do that from tip to tail. So there's something that's a little bit more defined there. The focus is on trauma-informed awareness, and that is something that is precious to every sector represented here. Whoever you are and whatever you're working on, whether you're hearing this for the first time today or whether you're a 30-year veteran in trauma-informed awareness and care, it's very important that it is accessible, clear, and ongoing, and we have the ability to see its power in the different industries and sectors that we are supporting, and including our own lives, but that's a whole other conversation. So partners and sponsors are helping us to make this accessible. So as a part of the PACES movement, our education and information, being the information resource, we have a huge resource center and brochures and information that are available. So when people are ready to start their PACES initiative, there it is. Next slide, please. So again, just as an example of sponsors, Genentech, Genentech sponsorship partners, these are the ways that we are, this is a big part of the PACES movement, so we are able to move forward, but these other organizations are able to join us and support us, and in that way, they're moving that forward, even if their businesses have a slightly different focus or it's simply for profit. Next slide, please. I love this slide. I've really enjoyed making these slides. So I love Post-its and I love Canva. So this is our ecosystem. You see a single leaf at the top, which is creating resilient communities. That's the free 16-hour accelerator program. Then folks arrive to growing resilient communities. So once they have that shared language, once they've begun to take those steps, they're asking, how can we get this into our communities? How can we get this into our organizations or the other organizations that we are supporting? Ultimately, with the goal of the goal of the PACES movement is to change policy, really through and through help folks, starting from grassroots and going all the way to policy so that we can have a better world, a healthier globe, trauma-informed awareness in the institutions that, especially the ones that need it most, and especially for vulnerable communities, including and especially children. So sustaining resilient communities, you're now looking at curated, tailored services for statewide government level work. And it is pure excitement when we hear folks that are really ready to say yes. We know that's going to have a far-reaching impact, even if it's not overnight. Next slide, please. And so how are we, what's the formula? So this is our format for the Growing Resilient Communities format, and you can always tell if which program it is at PACES because you'll see the double leaves at the bottom. So this is what we call the GRC. So this is a framework. This is sometimes a starting point or a point to revisit. No right or wrong answer. So what most often happens is we are utilizing this framework, but other organizations may have something special that they're building in. So definitely want to emphasize this is powerful. We think about things like aggregating, strategizing to track progress, engaging, help folks get excited about joining your PACES initiative and helping them understand where they can be online and offline with you. So I know COVID was a real wrench in our program and it was an incredible wake-up call. So we need both. We need the online, we just need access through and through, online and in person. So engaging and understanding that, at least that entry-level language surrounding ACEs science, local government, activating through developing policies and connecting with other organizations. Celebrating what's working, so telling our stories and really making space for that lived experience. Hosting events, promoting your initiatives, so making sure folks can hear it far and wide, and educating. So when you have that message and you're ready to take it out there, speakers bureaus, presentations, content, and feedback, which I'm representing today. Hi. Okay, next slide, please. So I really love that there is this call to action. And so it's in 3 parts. You might do them all. You might have not paid much attention to any. And so today we have a chance to think about connecting, reflecting, and acting. So you can join Yolo meetings and listserv to work and to grow together, share knowledge and resources and funding, and learn about civic engagement opportunities. You can reflect. For personal reflection, you can ask, how am I approaching this work? How am I incorporating effective collaboration and quality relationships in my work and life? And so for those of you here and for the folks that are streaming in, there's an interactive workbook that you can download. You will have gotten that in your email. Make sure when you're populating the sections, you save so that you can literally return to this and make notes for yourself. So we wanted to make sure that the reflection even had a little activity and action in it. So an act, and we're going to tackle the act in a final session and not too long from now. So learn more about ACEs Aware, PACES Science 101, and download trauma-informed resources on the Resilient Yolo website. Sign up to join Resilient Yolo monthly meetings and learnings network here. So your interactive workbook, you can click that, what's in blue, and it should open up to where you're supposed to be. Next slide. PACE's science is for everybody. Let's share wisdom. You might have a piece or a nugget, and someone else might have a piece or a nugget. And when we share those, that's when we're really mining. That's when we're really pooling the wisdom and really looking at things that are going to move us forward and help solve the problems that all of your organizations here and all of the folks watching are trying to solve. When you have your interactive workbook, these are also, you can click these links and it should take you to resource pages. So my goodness, I would love to just hear from, we're about maybe 5 minutes out. So if you have any thoughts about, is PACES a movement? How is it a movement to your organization? We'd love to hear from you.
So we have a microphone here. If there's anyone that would like to share, just raise your hand and we'll come on over.
Does everyone feel ready to connect? Is that happening today? Like, are you connecting okay with others when you're kind of having lunch and things? Is there any good connectors here? Exchanging business cards, sharing your LinkedIn? Okay, I see some connectors. What about reflectors? Are there any introverts here? Very good at reflecting. Okay, I see some shy introverts, like, yes, it's us reflecting. And what about the change agents? Oh, okay. Hands up? Yeah, please.
Garth Lewis with the Yolo County Office of Education. I just really appreciated so to answer your question, yes, it is a movement. And the conversation regarding power, right, that power shifting and defining what those shifts must look like in order for us to truly claim, one, that it's a movement, but more importantly, that it's going to achieve what its intention truly is. I think it's really important to continue to center the conversation on that power shift in decision-making, resource sharing. Those are the things that have held these kinds of conditions in place for far too long. And so I just appreciate centering that conversation in your presentation today.
Thank you.
You bet.
Great. Kahshanna, can I ask you a question? I was going to say,
Yes.
You've had a chance to interact with all of us today. What stands out for you about Yolo County? What do you think is priming us for some success here?
Ooh, that's a juicy one. I think based on the folks that I've met today, I think what's priming you for success is that you have staying power. This isn't your first rodeo. Even if you're showing up and learning about the jargon and the language, you're here for a reason. And so however that lived experience is going to work through you to make sure that other folks have opportunities and have access, it's not just apparent. It is moving, and it is really powering me up today. So I've seen people giggling and laughing and saying hello to each other, and maybe I've been awkwardly throwing out my business cards everywhere, and there's a real quiet joy here that is not showy. So I've been in New York for 30 years, although I'm from Southern Cali. So I like that you're rooted in the work and you're not looking to make it flashy. You really are here to impact change.
All right, with that, let's give a round of applause for Kahshanna. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And actually, she's not going anywhere. She's welcome to start wrapping up because we are going to head off to our last and final session. So we do have one more final session today. We're really looking forward to it. Last year, we had a chance to collaborate and really act, But as you heard at the beginning, our focus has been about really putting what you heard, all the sessions, Kahshanna's words into action. So we'd really ask you to stick with us today and carry over. We're going to move to the NPR room in just a moment. Kahshanna and Gail Kennedy are going to lead an interactive closing workshop for everyone. Just so you know, before that, your next step. So your survey for the conference will come to you in an email this afternoon. We ask you to fill it out. We'd love your feedback on the food, the speakers, the workshops. Last year, the feedback was the workshops moved so quick, so they were longer this year. We'd love to know if that worked for you, if you can fill it out. We've asked you all, if you are interested, because we've gotten that question a couple times now, how do you join Resilient Yolo? If you go to bit.ly, join Resilient Yolo. It'll give you resources, information about monthly meetings and collaborative resources. I believe that should also be in your final email as well. And then I was asked to remind you all, if you didn't get or grab a swag bag, please grab it now, because we're about to end our day. And before those go away from this space, we want to make sure everyone got one. The photos from today's event will be on the Resilient Yolo Facebook page. If you got captured in many a photo, which most of us did, you'll see them on there later. And the next Resilient Yolo meeting is October 13th at 11 a.m. The group meets virtually. And again, you can ask myself or anyone on there if you are not a member and you want to be added, we can get you that information. All right, with that, let's go ahead and head on over to the multi-purpose room. And there is actually snacks as well. I was told to tell you to encourage you to head that way.
Nice. Thank you.